everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. As I promised, I'll continue the series of real-life stories from the communist regime. Today I'm going to read you a story from this book. This book is called Înghițiți de pustiu, Amintiri din Comunism, which translates as Swallowed by Emptiness, Memories from Communism, which is a self-published book, and it's essentially a collection of stories from the days of communism written by different authors. A while ago, someone who has not lived under communism was trying to convince me that there was more equality under the law between men and women in the days of the USSR. When I called bollocks on that narrative, he was pissed off that I offended his sensibilities. As if I ever cared about that. Anyway, to quash that clearly false narrative, I'm going to read you today a story about a domestic violence allegation followed by a paternity fraud and then a divorce through the communist court, which ended in jail for the man. You'll see that as I read through it, many of you will notice that it sounds like something that happened yesterday in some Western nation. It's essentially a story of a college student who got married to a narcissistic woman whose mother was a colonel in the Securitate, which was the secret police, just like the Stasi was in the former GDR. Since the story is very long, I'll only read the portion with the legal proceedings. Now, I'll put a static picture because I'll heavily edit the audio. I do so because this book doesn't exist in ebook format, and or if it does, I was unable to find it a few months ago when I bought it. And as such, I'll translate in real time as I read in Romanian, and I wish to spare you the uhs and the inevitable curses which shall occur when I stumble upon a hardly translatable word. I'll leave a link in the low bar to the e-store where I bought it from. Sadly, I'm not aware of any English version of it or ways to order it internationally, which makes this video probably even more useful. Okay, so let us begin from page 118. The first confrontation happened in the party gathering. It was a harsh fight in which two women and a former illegalist from Mados, the mother-in-law was a Hungarian ethnic, attacked the little guy. The guy was condemning with proletary fury what was laughable at the end of the day. One of the professors asked for his exclusion from the Communist Party, which equivalated with the expulsion from the college in his last year, in the last semester. She was also asking the party to increase revolutionary vigilance when accepting new members. This guy had just been accepted into the Communist Party 1 year earlier. The whole problem started because the guy didn't want to self-criticize himself and was insisting on telling the story and the events as they were. And the Romanian Communist Party didn't want to know the reality, just wanted the guy to self-criticize. All the students defended him. He was very surprised of this factor. With some of the students, he was still in an open fight for a long time. He was pleasantly impressed and warmed by this proof of solidarity, which was unasked and unhoped for. It was a truly revolutionary sentiment at the party's session, which announced the storm that was going to follow after 8 years in the entire country. Now, this story happened starts in 1981. Anyway, eventually the guy simulated a sort of self-critic, and it was sanctioned with a blaming vote and with a warning. He was starting to understand in practice the difference between nationalist communists and internationalist communists, especially internationalist feminists. The professor who was leading the attack against him was, of course, to become a great Democrat after 1989. Once the session has finished, the young man left to his attorney to ask for an open of the trial and to question the paternity of his child. He there found out something very interesting. Fathers were only allowed to start proceedings for contesting paternity with a smaller time frame window as opposed to women. Half of that time. If in 6 months a man wasn't starting the proceedings to question the paternity, he would no longer have the right to make such a complaint. In other words, if there was no fight on December 6, 1981, or if he would postpone the trial a little bit more, he would have been left with another man's child to support. He thanked Saint Nicholas and the party that pissed him off before the limit term. All these because in the communist Romania, men were not equal to women. More to the point, in order for an action to question the paternity to be admitted by the court, the father needed to prove that he had been in a physical impossibility to have sexual contact with his wife in the first 3 months of pregnancy of hers. These were the direct consequences of the Central Committee of the Communist Romanian Party, which essentially said that no child should be fatherless. A decision that is clearly sexist and subordinated all the men to the whims of all women. Let's be clear, this decision wasn't made by the party because it loved women, but because since it demanded them to give birth on command, the state also understood to attract them through this protection. Then, through sexual corruption, they could manipulate all the women, and through them, all the men. Do you remember the electoral campaign in 1990 and the first democratic vote when women were entering before the husbands in the voting booth to see where they put the stamp on? Anyway, his problem, the student's problem, was very simple because he had married in April and the child was born on September 22nd. By declaring that he did not have sexual contact with his wife before marriage, the action could be admitted by the courts. But if the wife had brought evidence, material evidence that there had been sexual contact before marriage, then the action would have been rejected by the court. But she didn't, and to be fair, she could not have brought such evidence at that time. So the process moved to medical analysis. They went to the Legal Medicine Institute with the girl and took the fingerprints and some blood prints. At the result, surprise! The girl who had been in a treatment less than 3 months before the analysis and thus could not establish concrete paternity. But Anda, that is the wife, started fearing the tests. If until then she would have told everyone that the tests are just a formality because there was no way to prove anything, then she had now changed her opinion. And although the court that is, gave 3 terms, 2 weeks difference from each other to come to the Legal Medicine Institute, she did not came to any of them. You don't want to know all the stories that this student has heard at the legal medicine from the other men who are also questioning the paternity of their children. But these stories have indeed enriched his general culture about the feminist logic and action. Those stories essentially made him an inflexible adversary to the piranha women, which did exist long before they had been officially acknowledged by the democratic mass media. It was now a gridlock because the law stated that if one of the parties does not come to 3 consecutive terms in a civil trial, that party loses the trial. Although the judge, a female old judge, gave a 4th term and accepted a statement from ONT Carpați, which was a company where only members of the Securitate would work, and in which stated that Anda had worked 3 days having groups of foreign tourists, of course Russians. The statement was a severe fake. It was only an external collaboration because if she were a student she could not get hired according to the law back then, and she would only take groups in her spare time through individual contract. That means she was not forced to work anywhere. These were 2 obviously sexist abuses. But the attorney of the student was a pragmatic guy. He invited him over a coffee and told him frankly, well, look, this is not fair, it's an abuse, but we must not contest it. But why? Well, because there is not a house in the game, or the car, or some clothes. It's about the fate of a child. If we will contest this, you will make yourself a bad name. The student denied the attorney's concerns and said, I don't care, I'll go to the medical institute again. And he went there and he won. Both of the tests excluded him entirely from the possibility of being the real father of the little girl. The expertise proved that beyond all reasonable doubt. The young man then went to celebrate at a bar with his co-workers. But during the celebration, he remembered that the judges and the attorney knew all along from the first time that this would be the result. They could even rule in his favor only on 1 piece of evidence. And that's when he became sad. The year of 1981 turned out to be a very good one. He finished college, got a diploma, also finished the mandatory military conscription and ended up as a lieutenant, retired, and also won the paternity trial. On August 23rd, which was the national holiday back in communism, there was also a decree which says that all convictions that ended up in under 5 years of imprisonment were to be quashed. So he also started the divorce and went on to his job, which was a job of professor, which he hated the most, and only the profession of pharmacist was considered even worse. He would admire female teachers and pharmacists, but he would consider that for a man it was an improper job. It was mandatory, however, to work at least 3 years at that particular job. His parents would have paid for his trial, so he was essentially thinking that he is now on the path to moving on from this particular incident. Well, he was legally correct, but you don't mess around with the internationalist feminists from the Securitate without getting into the trouble, and that is what he was going to find out soon. So now the fifth part, the judgment. In April 1982, our young man had met with two friends on the hallway of the Justice Palace. These two friends were also asked to testify in the divorce proceedings. He didn't mind what they were saying because he was clear with them. All it had to do was to result from their statements that he had no way of finding understanding with his wife. Whether it was his fault or her fault, it didn't really matter. The formalities demanded these statements. Following the hospitalization and the winning of the paternity trial, the things were quite clear, but the procedure was a nightmare. The three entered into the courthouse and expected their file to turn out. As they were sitting there, a young man came in who was like 2 or 3 years older than them and on an average stature. He was a very well-built young man, blonde and blue-eyed, and he wore metallic glasses. He asked who is the young professor from the three. Our hero was then made aware by his friends. Yes, what do you want, says him. The blonde man pulls out an ID and says, I am prosecutor XY, please show me some ID. Bored, the young man showed his ID. Without commentaries, the prosecutor takes the ID and put it in his pocket and says something whilst leaving fast from the hall. Our hero did not understood what the prosecutor has said, but annoyed that the prosecutor had taken his ID, the young man went after the prosecutor, who was almost running on the halls of the Justice Palace. Then a very bizarre scene had followed, in which the young man was following the prosecutor. He knew the place and he was carefully going around the groups that were waiting on the hallway. Annoyed that his ID had been retained without any warrant or citation, our hero was cursing that the group of people make him lose the prosecutor from sight. But he wasn't understanding how the hell would the prosecutor run so fast. Anyway, the guy went up to the first floor and enters in a door in which it says the prosecutor's office. Oh shit, think the young man who was already concerned from running. The office was very small. It was more likely longer than widened. Anyway, our young man wanted to say something against the prosecutor, but the prosecutor was even faster. He put 2 or 3 sheets of paper in his hand, gave him a pen, and showed him an interior door. Get over there and write everything. What? Right there how you beat up your wife. Angry, the young man opens the door and gets in. When he steps inside, he frozen. It was a huge chamber with a massive office, and behind the office there were also the colored pictures of the victims of Rămău. Now, Rămău is essentially a serial killer that tormented the city of Bucharest in the 70s. So he sits on the office and starts writing. He puts orders in his ideas and becomes calmer. He doesn't understand why he was taken from the courthouse without a warrant and what was the prosecutor really wanting from him after having already 2 definitive sentences on his pending trial. One from the militia and one from the prosecutor's office from the municipality of Bucharest. In fact, the militia had already sent the file to the prosecutors, but the chief prosecutor called him in his office and told him very simple, fast and categorically, because in the legal medicine certificate says that you endangered her life, I must send the file further for attempted murder. The young man wanted to protest, but he was not allowed. Go there and make peace with your wife, otherwise we will arrest you. That had happened the previous winter. He went from the Justice Palace very annoyed. He walked from there towards the Royal Palace, went to the Patria Cinema, and then went on to the Petar Moș Street. And then when he ended up at the end of the street, he used a phone, a public phone, and called his former wife right across the street from the U.S. Embassy. The first and the last phone call after the incident. He wanted to apologize, but he couldn't. He was simply left without words. He only told her that he was mistaken regarding her personality and hang up. That's it. No matter what happened, he had no desire to make peace with her. The DA's office of the municipality of Bucharest inquired and also reached the same resolution as the militia, which was essentially bodily harm, even though none of that had actually happened. So anyway, they sent the file backwards. Meanwhile, the decree of quashing convictions from August 1981 also made the entire case quite useless. But anyway, there had to be a sentence, so what the hell did the prosecutor really want? So he finished writing all the pages that the prosecutor had asked for him, puts the pen nearby, and starts looking at the pictures. The prosecutor came in and took all the sheets, and then brings him in the next room, and the secretary there, who was a very nice woman, was there essentially as a mediator. And he started reading the statement. Bored from the first lines, he puts the sheets down and said, "And who do you think will believe you?" "Believe what?" "That you're not the father of the child, as you write here." "But they don't have to believe me." "But who do they have to believe?" "Well, there is a definitive decision of a court which says this." The prosecutor was now stunned. The hit was just too high for him. So he swallowed hardly and said, "Did you actually win a paternity trial?" Well, because you see, the cases solved in favor of the men in the communist justice were something like 1 in 10,000. All the workers in the field knew the directive and the abuses in the field, and if this guy had won the trial, it means that things were indeed very, very severe. Yes, I have won the trial. Moreover, the former wife didn't want to change the papers for the child, especially the birth certificate, and cut my name from where it says father's. Although I have also include copies from the court's decision. The prosecutor was now very sad, and he took the sheets of paper and wanted to leave and said, "You sit here." Now, our young professor was enjoying his triumph. The secretary had understood the story and was quite warm and amicable with him. They talk about the children, dog, and other things just for the time to pass. Although he went to the prosecutor's cabinet at 9 a.m., now it was almost 7 p.m. when the prosecutor came back. Remember, our young professor now was without water, food, or telephone. Yeah, these were the communist inquiries. Anyway, the prosecutor gave him his ID back and let him go. He said, "You will come here every Sunday starting from the end of this month. Are we clear?" It was very clear. So our young man came every month to sign for the probation. What had happened was that his distinguished mother-in-law, who had worked at the T, also had free access to any minister. Wanted to take revenge at any cost on her former son-in-law and wanted to prove that she is stronger. She used all of her relationships to end up to the minister. And this individual essentially disposed arrest for our young professor and changed the court decision from bodily harm to attempted murder. All based on the lies and pressures from the protectors of the comrade Lieutenant Colonel from the Securitate, which was essentially the mother-in-law of our hero. She was a woman who was not content only with the conviction. She really wanted the young man arrested, even over the decree. Even if all of this meant an abuse, this was a mentality that the young man was bound to meet again and again and again on all the women who had worked for the Securitate, even after 1989. Their will was the law, even for the courts. They only had to prove that they were right, and they had the absolute power, and they were proving that. As far as our young man was concerned, the minister was absolutely in the wrong, because there was no attempted murder, and that could also not be legally true, because attempted murder is only based on evidence of intent, which definitely did not exist. Also, for the criminal deeds that exceed the intention of the author, the jurists had already solved this problem since the Roman times. The phenomenon is called praeter intentie. Anyway, This is exactly what was happening if we were to believe the legal medicine certificate, although everyone knew that the legal medicine certificate were fake. In fact, the mother-in-law from the Securitate had no idea about the laws of the nation. That's why she demanded, through her colleagues and abusing the power of Securitate, to prolong hospitalization over the legal limit. In the criminal code, there was also something that differentiated the framing of a particular crime if the number of hospitalization days exceeded 12. So what the hell did the prosecutors really want? Our young professor came to the prosecutor every week as instructed until July, when he was arrested. Legally, in the presence of his attorney, but lacking the secretary, with the criminal file on the table. The prosecutor shrugged it off and showed the order signed by the minister. Back in those days, the order of the minister was to be enforced even for the courts, not to mention other prosecutors who were subordinated to the minister in a very militarized hierarchic structure. At the trial, our young man tried in vain to defend himself, and his attorney tried also in vain to quote professors from Soviet law. He didn't like the Russians, but considering the profile of the accusation and the supporters, it was a good strategy. The prosecutor also demanded the conviction to prison for attempted murder based on the decision by the Supreme Court of Romanian Socialist Republic in 1969. That's very bizarre because the article was nowhere quoted in the accusation, nor during the trial, nor in the motivation of the sentence. It just mentioned the name of the decision. Our young man had no idea why he was being convicted. And since the decisions of the Supreme Tribunal had the authority of ex officio judgment, they were essentially a new law, which didn't appear in the criminal code, and on a law which also the mere citizens could not study. So he would try the appeal also in vain, from detention. So the court ruled against him, but also did not explain to him regarding the law under which he was being convicted, neither during the trial, neither after the trial. So the time has passed. From a conviction of 5 years, he served 2 years and a half, that is 30 months. On his parole, he did not manage to find a job according to his studies, and also could not get a home. Although in theory the party was supposed to give him a job, that didn't happen either. But he was demanded to get an employment in 14 days and also notify where he found employment. So essentially he was left isolated. He eventually found employment as a minimum wage worker. He was working on fixing industrial installation. He was doing essentially utilitarian alpinism, even though it wasn't called that way back in those days. But he was mainly painting industrial installations. Alright, I'll stop here on page 130. The story is very interesting because it goes to show how justice used to be served during the internationalist feminist times of the communist regime. And after hearing this, does anything from what I have just read sound different from the horror stories we hear in North America or in other countries where they have a genuine divorce industry? Because the more I read into it, the more it sounds to me like the Soviet-style proceedings just simply moved away from here towards the western part of the world. Most of these insanities would be impossible today, although the divorce proceedings are by no means perfect now either, but definitely fairer than back then. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story, and if you want to see more from the Memories of Communism series, check out this playlist. Also consider that it takes time to dig up the stories and translate them, so if you enjoyed it, please do consider supporting this channel through Patreon or through a donation. Speaking of Patreon, audio-only episodes are now available for patrons only, regardless of the pledge. So anyway, don't forget to subscribe, follow me on Twitter at FreedomAlternat, and talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching.